I want to acknowledge and pay respect to the Tonga people, who are the traditional custodians of this land, now known as Compton, California. The Tlahuica people have lived in this land for thousands of years, and they have a deep and sacred relationship with this earth. And it is my responsibility as an Afro-Indigenous woman to acknowledge the land I live on because of our similar history of colonization, genocide, and displacement. Sadly, this is an ongoing issue for past, present, and ascending Indigenous people across the Americas. Therefore, I want to acknowledge my use of this land because it has come at a great price to the Tonga people. And I want to recognize their existence and their contributions to our community. And tonight, I say this land acknowledgement, not as an act of performative solidarity, but a commitment to my ancestors that guide me and protect me. My name is Abril Rodriguez Villanueva, and me and my family built Altar de Muertos in Compton, California. Yeah. And I'm a descendant of the Tlahuica people, an ethnic group that was part of the Aztec Empire. And I'm a descendant of Black enslaved people that were brought to Mexico to work on sugar plantations. But tonight, I want to talk about a topic that is dear to my heart, Dia de los Muertos, Day of the Dead. An indigenous celebration that has evolved over the centuries, but remains a celebration of life and is used as a coping skill to channel our grief. And the ofrendas, the offerings, are the objects that go in the altar, the structure and altar. And they're surrounded by pictures and marigolds and papel picado and copal. And the creation of the altar can be a very therapeutic experience. And the location where the altar, the structure, is placed becomes a healing location for those that are seeking comfort and connection. When I moved to Compton, California, May of 2021, most of my family members had gotten COVID-19 vaccines. And I felt like the worst of the pandemic was behind us and we were safe. Yet, there were multiple reports of people dying every day, alone, without their family members being able to help them transition to the next stage. My heart will break for them. And I found myself thinking of my grandmother, Mami Koy. She died of cancer in June 2004. She had been sick for a long time. And I thought she was going to be able to hold on a little bit until November, when I was going to be finished with basic training in the Army. So I packed up my bags, I boarded on a plane, and I arrived at South Carolina. And one night, I had a dream. And I had the most serene, warm, comforting dream of my life. I dreamed with my grandmother's cat, Chispita, which means little spark of light. And the feeling was so overwhelming. It followed me the next day until it was time for mail call. I was sitting in the concrete shining my boots, when I looked up and I saw my drill sergeant. And he started walking towards me. And in that moment, I knew she was gone. He didn't have to say anything to me. And now I was sitting in my home in Compton, California, hearing about this report about people dying. And all the unprocessed feelings that I had came to the surface. And I started grieving my grandmother all over again. And I became homesick. Homesick for Morelos, Mexico, the land of the Tlahuicas, the land of my ancestors. I became homesick for my grandmother's house. I began to think of all the memories and all the times that we spent together. And I began to think of all my relatives that are buried there. And once again, I was unable to travel to Mexico. But this time, I was able to channel my grief and my love for my grandmother and build a monumento altar, meaning a huge altar in front of my home. And when I told my husband, Casey, about my idea of building an altar in front of her house, he was hesitant to have something so personal in front of her house. And then I told him the size, and he was ready to tap out. I managed to convince him that it would be a nice experience to have with his father. And I told him it would be nice to build it. And so before I knew it, my husband and my father-in-law started building the structure. And then I reached out to my sister. She's the creative in the family. And I asked her if she could help me make paper flowers, flores de papel, and if she had any other pictures of her relatives that had passed away, and also objects to place in the altar. And then my son and my daughter, they started painting sugar skulls, calaveras, and monarch butterflies, and they began to make paper flowers. And I was in charge of gathering material, buying the papel picado, making sure we had enough marigolds, that we had enough pictures. And one day, I was scrolling through Instagram, and I saw a post from Self-Help Graphics, an art gallery that has been celebrating Dia de los Muertos in Los Angeles since the 70s. And they had posted that they were going to create a map with featuring the altares and the community and LA County community. And so I quickly reached out, and they were kind enough to include us and put us in the map and post us on Instagram. And I became afraid. I started to have second thoughts about becoming so public with the altar. I was afraid I was going to offend my neighbors. I was afraid that it was going to be an eyesore in my block. I was afraid that I was going to get a ticket from code enforcement. But regardless of my fear and hesitation, we went ahead and started the project. And my neighbors became very curious and started asking questions. And they began asking me about a parade. We were confused. What do you mean a parade? Aren't you guys making bleachers? And I was like, oh no, it's just the altar because it's huge. And I invited my neighbors to bring the pictures of their loved ones so they could place it on the altar. And so there was an excitement in my block about the altar. And people wanted to share the stories of their loved ones. And they wanted to build community. So once the altar was completed, I was still afraid. And I would look outside the window to watch out for code enforcement. But I soon began to realize people were stopping their cars and taking pictures. And I started seeing, I would wake up and go to the altar and see pictures of other people. Yeah. And I realized that people were waiting for me at night when I will come out and turn on the candles and I will burn copal. And they wanted to tell me about their last minutes with their loved ones. And one night, when I was outside with the altar, placing water, fixing the pictures, a car stopped in front of my house. And a person got out. And they told me they had traveled an hour away to come see the altar. I was blown away. I was humble. And I realized that the altar had its own energy. It was an entity drawing people in. I also realized that the visitors were seeking community and connection and a place to talk about their grief without shame. We often forget that healing is an ongoing process. And Dia de los Muertos allow us to process our emotions with people around us. Placing altares creates spaces where we can honor our loved ones that are no longer here. Allow us to share our story. Allow us to connect. And as a community, we need these spaces to be able to heal, especially in communities like Compton, California, where collective trauma is an issue. My name is Abril Rodriguez Villanueva, and me and my family built Altares de Muerto in Compton, California.